So welcome to Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery. So you can't really go through life without hitting a rough patch of road, like an area full of potholes and making some mistakes. It's just part of being human. And life is sometimes overwhelming and sometimes wonderful. But sooner or later, we're going to get to a point where we're off the map and we are confronted by something we're not necessarily having the skills to deal with, and we have some unmet needs and we make mistakes, and that's just part of being human. You can't really get through life without making, and the point is, it's not about living a life that is free from mistakes or but what we learn from those things so that we don't keep making the same mistakes again and again, Yeah, and sometimes because of these mistakes, we suffer because we can't forgive ourselves, or we've missed an opportunity, or we hurt someone, or we were hurt, and we cling to this regret, this guilt, this shame that we can't let go of. And we go back to it, like when you have a cut in your mouth and your tongue keeps touching it, those wounded places in ourselves, we keep going back, going, if only, why, you know what I mean? Often relationships, losses, and we're like, if only I'd done this, if only I'd said that, if only I'd given them more time, if only I'd said what I needed. But in truth, you can sometimes still say what you need and not get your need met. Maybe you didn't say your need because you knew the person you were with couldn't meet that need because they had their own trouble. There's just, and because of our, the way we're raised, our trauma patterns, our relationship patterns, we don't have the skills to express ourselves, or our needs haven't been met in the past, so we don't know how to ask for what we want, or we're chronic pleasers and we can't set a boundary and, leave before we get in a very bad situation. So, yeah. In Buddhism, this regret is one of the 5 obstacles to meditation or to entering deep samadhi. And it's called, I don't know the proper pronunciation, but in Sanskrit it's kaukritya, and in Pali kukukya, something like that. Remorse after having done wrong, or regret. And often, we do the best we can with the skills we have at the time. So sometimes we make selfish choices, but sometimes we're back against the wall and we did the best we could, Like I remember once I had a friend who was a bit older and couldn't walk well. And we were crossing the road in America over this very big highway. And my friend decided to cross when the pedestrian light wasn't green. She grabbed my hand and crossed the road. But there was it was a very, very bad thing to do. There was cars coming and it wasn't very safe. And I just panicked. I really felt like my life was in danger. So I let go of her hand because she was going really slow. And I felt like I'd run over. So I let go of her hand and I just walked more quickly. And I knew she wouldn't trip, but I was very concerned, and I felt really bad afterwards. She's like, why did you let go of my hand, And I was like, well, why did you grab hold of my hand when it wasn't the time to cross? And I felt bad, but it was like a primeval response of like, save myself, Other times I actually saved someone else's life, like they were drowning and I helped them out of the water. But at that particular moment, I just went into flight or fight and I, saved myself. So there's a story in Zen circles of a man who, it was war, time of war, and there was a lot of chaos. People would come in the night, people would be abducted, villages were set on fire. And so one day this man's son went out to cut grass for the buffaloes and he didn't come back. And he thought either my son's been abducted into the army, he's been murdered, or he's just fallen in love and run away. Because in those days you didn't marry someone that your parents didn't approve of. And his father was a widower and very devastated at the loss of his son. And he basically made a shrine to his grief. And he became extremely lonely and bitter and felt he didn't have a purpose to live anymore. He had no reason, nothing to pass on. He was old. He had no one to care for him. He felt his son had betrayed him. And he was like, if only, I'd been a better father. If only there wasn't a war. And so he stopped socializing with people. He lost his social network. He just became consumed by grief. And he thought that by being consumed by grief, he was showing his love, his devotion to his son. But really, he was just ruining whatever moments of life he had left, which is not what his son would have wanted. So one day, his son, who had been abducted into the army, came back home after having endured war and trauma and having seen horrible things. And he was knocking on the outside of the house going, "Father, I'm here." And it was like 5 years later, so he was really haggard and had a beard and looked quite different. And he's like, "Father, I'm here. It's taken me so long and it's been so hard to come back and find my way here, but I finally made it." And the father thought it was the village kids making fun of his grief. And he's like, "My son is dead. Why are you torturing me? Just leave me to my grief." And the son was knocking on the door for days and days, and the man wouldn't come out. And the son asked what had happened to his father, and the villagers said, "Look, it's a lost cause. He's just insane. He talks to himself. He talks to people who are dead who aren't even there. There's just no point. Just give up." So his son, in grief, just gave up and walked away because he thought his father, just being there, he was agitating his father. And his father literally thought he was a ghost. So it's really sad. It's like when you maybe you go overseas for a few years and you come back and you've had a family member who's had a psychotic break and is in a psych ward and they're just not really there anymore, or like they're heavily medicated, they're an addict. We all have had those experiences where someone we used to love who doesn't really love us anymore. And we're still like, "Hey, I'm here and I love you," but they're far away. They're not fully present. They're not the person you knew. And it's such a heartbreaking thing when you still love someone, but they're not who they were and you're not who you were, But that can happen. People can make a shrine to their self-loathing about a mistake they made, their shame, and they think they're doing a favor to the person they harmed or to the person they lost. Like, maybe I didn't spend enough time with my parent and now my parent's dead and I feel guilty. So I make a shrine in my heart and I self-flagellate and I feel bad. But it's really a useless, unconstructive behavior, because that man was trapped in his grief and his self-loathing and his shame. He couldn't live and he couldn't see his son there in that moment. He couldn't make room for new things, right? He couldn't appreciate and move on and grow from that breakage. So after there is any kind of breakage, it may take years to recover. In truth, it may take years, but we still have to try to recover and make room for new things and new love and new growth, and the main thing is, maybe if you've broken your leg, it will never quite be the same again, but still you must make room for new things or get up and walk again, right? We know that if someone has a knee or a hip replacement, it's really crucial in the first few weeks and months to get up and walk, or otherwise you'll never walk again, right? So give yourself time to grieve and give yourself time to heal, but get up and walk again. Yeah. So, yeah, we live in a And, ask yourself, if I was me, if I was a friend of myself, and this person was telling me this happened to me and I feel regret about it, what would you tell yourself if you were your own friend? Maybe you would tell yourself, don't be so hard on yourself. And you did the best you could with the skills and the trauma and the conditioning you had at the time. And look, if you were a shitty, selfish person, admit it. But the fact that you feel regret shows that there's hope. Regret is not always a bad thing because it shows you have a conscience. You have an ethical compass. A sociopath and a psychopath don't have any. It's like no empathy, no guilt, right? So if you have that, that's actually a good sign. And yeah, it helps us to not make the same mistake again. So within Buddhism, there are a few things we can do in terms of living with regret and guilt. Living our amends is a good option. So do the opposite of what you've done. If you were a person who was emotionally dismissive and selfish with their time, and then their parent passed away and they didn't give them enough time, become emotionally available. And, there's this very human habit when we see people in pain, we give them a lot of space because it's painful to watch. So people with depression, people with long-term depression, people with long-term chronic illness, they have no friends because they're hard to be around. They always need help. They never get better. It's hard to watch someone who never gets better, who's not happy to be around. So those people who are, going through that challenge, they need support. Of course, you've got to look at your own resources and your own ability and your own needs and respect those things, your own commitments, and not overcommit yourself. But most of us could give a little more of our personal time and space just to sit with someone, not offering advice, not offering judgment, not placing ourselves above them, but just humbly as an equal, as a friend, as an ally, to be present, just bearing witness. That's a very powerful thing. And something lacking, as people have become more and more time poor, they tend to just invest in their nuclear family, their romantic partner, their job. But actually the world is poorer because we don't have these kind of soft networks anymore. We need this beloved community, and we need to spread our love wider than one basket, because when 50% of marriages fail now, and relationships are even more short term. So it's really important to spread your love wide, so that you have more than one basket if something falls away. And look at your attachment patterns. It's really, really useful to know what your attachment pattern is and what you can do to address that, because often people who've been abandoned because they're afraid of intimacy and they want to have it confirmed to them that yes, relationships aren't safe, love isn't safe, connection isn't safe. So they'll literally seek out someone who is emotionally unavailable to prove that to them. And it's also the challenge, like love must be hard, and that drama. That person's emotionally unavailable, awesome, I'm going to chase them. Rather than, if someone has abandonment issues, if they find someone who's emotionally available and very stable, they'll be like, so boring, so boring, no drama, no, I don't feel that pulling in the bottom of my stomach, So look at, if you're repeatedly landing yourself in the same situation, what am I doing? And no, I'm not, that person is emotionally unavailable, so I'm not going to go down that person is depressed, and I'm not going to go down that road of trying to save them and make something that's not going to work. yeah, so other important factors are things like the practice of beginning anew, which is a practice from the Plum Village tradition, which is a way to ensure that you don't make more mistakes and that you learn to communicate your needs in a relationship, and that you every 2 weeks or so you light a candle, and on a Friday night or whenever is a good time, and you sit down with your partner and your family and you just mindfully share what's going on. And if you have someone you need to hash out something with, that you do so in a way that isn't riddled with blame and violent language, that is in a loving way, in a mindful way, where you're taking responsibility for your feelings, like, so that you can address needs and acknowledge what's going on and clarify misunderstandings. Because otherwise, in a relationship, all these things go unsaid, and then before you know it, someone is going somewhere else to get their needs met because what is a need is not being addressed in the relationship, or someone leaves because their needs are not being met in the relationship. Whereas if you have beginning anew has 4 steps. First one is saying what's good, what's working. So you sandwich your difficult things. Good, bad, good. My darling, I love you. I'm so glad I can share my life with you. I love the way you're parenting our kids. And, I really am so committed to this relationship. And that's why I need to, say things that are not always easy to hear, because I value you enough to be honest with you and to try and work through it, because I think our relationship is worth it. And then the second point, acknowledging your own faults. I know I've been super busy and I've been neglecting the housework. And I know it's such a tradition for people of a certain gender to avoid doing those things. And it's expected that you will do those things. And I don't want our marriage to build up resentment. So I'm going to do my fair share. And it's not that I'm helping you with the housework. I am an adult who has dirty dishes, and therefore as an adult I should do my share. You're not my mother. So like that, self-reflection. Or I know I've been really irritable lately, and I know I've been snapping at you. I'm really sorry. It's not you, it's work. It's really stressful right now. My boss is away. So I'm going to try not to do that now. And then the difficult thing. And so when that person says the difficult thing, the other person needs to not interrupt them. And it's like the person who has the talking stick, but the person who has the talking stick needs to practice mindfulness, and they need to not speak in the heat of the moment, but, put the brakes on, reflect. Is this my misunderstanding? Is this something I've done wrong? In which case, apologize. Or is there some hurt and something that really needs to be addressed? So, speak about that thing. Like, I really want you to have friends. But when you go out for really long periods of time with those friends, I start to wonder if maybe you like other people more than me, and I feel a bit resentful. I feel a bit insecure, and I realize that's my problem. But sometimes I just need reassurance, because I was, my one of my parents died, or past partners have left me, so I have these issues. So I just need some reassurance, and I need us to have as much time together as you spend with your other friends. So I'm trying not to be jealous, but I'm also acknowledging that I have this need for your company and to have our commitment reaffirmed, stuff like that, basically. But this is just an example. Or, when you said that, I felt da 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 da. It was triggering for me. It was hurtful. Did you mean it this way? Because I'm trying to understand what you really meant. And, I want us to live together in love and not acrimony. So how can we work with this, and what were your feelings around that? And if you have some unmet needs, or if you're hurt, can we talk about that, rather than you being aggressive with me, rather than you being hurtful, rather than you blaming me because I don't deserve that. Something like that. And you have to really slow it down and look at your own triggers. And if the other person is like, this is a very triggering issue for me, so can we take a day and come back? It's so tempting to just blow up. But if you know you're going to blow up and you know you're just going to say things unskillfully, it's better not to. It's better to just take time and pull back. Because those things over time, those little unspoken things can become like an avalanche of unsaid, resentful things that lead to a massive rupture in the relationship. And these, a relationship doesn't rupture, just in a moment. It's everything. It's all those little paper cuts, death by 1,000 cuts that come before, where someone will literally get to it could just be the man doesn't do the dishes for the 100th time, but it wasn't just the 100th time, it was the 99 times before, or whatever, the woman blaming or whatever, being antagonistic. But it's those little things that, become a heavy burden on a relationship that finally break it. And someone literally gets to a point and it's like, this is hell, and this is too hard, because they're not doing the work of maintaining the relationship. They're not doing it's like a car. It needs to move. It needs maintenance, needs oil, so there won't be friction. There needs to be deep understanding, and no two people are the same. So there's always going to need to be communication, and not just kind of where you're like, this is my needs and I just expect you to give me everything and I feel this way and only my feelings matter, kind of. But two people taking responsibility for their own happiness and their own needs, sharing a life together, like the circle of infinite, two wholes making infinity, not two halves making a whole. And there's also, the idea of self-hatred and blame and shame. That's one aspect when you make a mistake. Or the other one is the need to blame others. We live in this kind of cancel culture where we need to blame and call out and condemn. But both of these are a duality and extreme, In fact, we live in a world of confused people competing for resources, where some people get more of the pie than others, and where circles of privilege operate around us and generate historical privilege or intergenerational trauma, depending on which community you belong to. And some of these things can intersect. Like you could be a man, but you could be Indigenous, or you could be woman, but you could be white. So it's intersectional. It's not just like, one thing. So yeah, these circles of privilege operate through us. And, denying and minimizing that we are not affected by race, gender, class, economy, what's gone before. It's just not really very logical, because we know that we are, this is because that is, this arises because that is. So we are all conditioned and affected by what's going on. So notice when you've been implicated in harm, whether it was intentional or unintentional, and take responsibility and keep asking questions. And if someone has, you've really examined yourself and you really believe that there is a misunderstanding, because, people see things through the lens of their own trauma sometimes. So they could be completely triggered and think that you've meant something and you didn't, but you've still got to, it helps to learn how to validate people's feelings. I can see this has come up for you, and I can see that that's really challenging for you, and I want to just acknowledge that I see that you're feeling this way, and that's no small thing, and I'm not unempathetic to that. It must be hard, but try to avoid but or however. And I'm also aware that I had no intention of that's not what I meant, but I also see that you're feeling this way. So should we delay our conversation, or, is there something I can do to reassure you that that's not what I meant? Something like that. And it's really hard, because sometimes people will be triggered by everything. So there's people like that, which is hard as well. And then sometimes we can be doing something and we can't see our own behavior. But that's the beauty of relationships. You learn where you're hidden, what you haven't resolved. It's mirrored back to you. You get feedback. So keep asking questions of how we can collectively or individually do better. In the world of deluded existence, which Buddhists call samsara, impacting people is almost inevitable. But, when a rupture happens, our habit is to either blame or shame someone, or, in order to defend ourselves because we want to believe we're a good person, or to shame ourselves and hate ourselves, turning it inwards, believing we're all bad. And both of these are a false duality, because we're not all bad, but we make mistakes. Yeah? And we're not all good either. So there's another thing that happens around racism or sexism or classism or historical blindness, where the more oppressed people are made to deal with the more privileged people's fragility, and like for example, an Indigenous person basically having to deal with the emotional outfall, rupture of tension around bad things that have happened in the past, and that Indigenous person, or woman or poor person or gay man, has to reassure the more privileged person, no, you're not that, but you're not that bad person, you're a good person. Like, you have to not only deal with the oppression of that thing, but you have to deal with someone's difficult feelings and guilt around that thing, which is really tiring. So try not to do that to, like if you are a person who cheated and you want the other person's forgiveness, you basically, and you're like, so sorry, I did this, and but you're not doing it for them. You're not asking forgiveness and rehashing this thing for them. You're doing it for your own guilt, and you want you want to be vindicated because you want to believe you're a good person. But that is not helping the person you screwed over. So ideally, you want to deal with these feelings with other white people, or with other people who have the same situation, rather than putting it on the oppressed person. Please deal with my insecurity around racism and my need to assure you that I'm not one of those white people, or I'm not one of those rich people. I'm different. Kind of, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's not their job, and it's the job of the one who is harmed to deal with their guilt and to purify themselves and to make a positive change so that doesn't happen again. But it also happens that sometimes someone who makes a mistake becomes a sacrificial lamb for a cause, because it's so much easier for society to say, yes, Pauline Hanson is racist, rather than acknowledging, actually, most white people have a problem with this, and this has happened. This is a system. This is not just one person. This is a system of privilege and selective memory in history. Or we love to, like, if some famous man cheats on his wife, or we find out that he's an abuser, then we're very happy to sacrifice him on the altar of public opinion and condemnation for making a mistake. While men who've done that, thousands, millions of them, breathe a sigh of relief and go, thank God they didn't find out I did that. Right? Like men who have literally done this thing, condemning other men who were publicly found out to do that thing. So yeah, we just need to be careful that we're not doing a witch hunt when really we're the ones. We haven't, it's like they say, one finger pointing at them and four fingers pointing at you. We need to do that work. And we need to just acknowledge that when we're speaking about patriarchy, it's not about hating men. When we're speaking about white privilege or racism, it's not about hating white people. It's just acknowledging what has happened and the harm that does. It's more than just men. Men are not bad. It's the system of dominance that is bad. Or, white people are not bad. It's colonization and the system of exploitation that happened historically that's bad, that was harmful to Indigenous people, right? Doesn't mean you're personally responsible, but it also means that you're still benefiting from it in some way. And privilege is not necessarily about something that you have, but rather an obstacle that you don't have to deal with in order to get what you need, right? And try to empathize with the person who does have to face those things. Yeah. So in Buddhism, there is 4 powers. The first one is like refuge, taking refuge in a source higher than yourself. Like in Alcoholics Anonymous, they would say, acknowledging I am helpless in my addiction, I take refuge in a source higher than myself. And that could just be human goodness. That could be luminous awareness. That could be Vajrasattva, the Bodhisattva of purification. And then the second one is confession. I did this, I regret this. And you think about this, like there's usually more than one thing when you think about your long lifetime. Like Tibetan yogis, at the end of the day, they would have white stones and black stones for the good deeds and the bad deeds and the good thoughts and the bad thoughts. And at first the pile of black stones is very high and the white stones is very small, but when they become aware of it. And that's why Vajrayana practitioners every day do this Bodhisattva purification mantra, Vajrasattva, because they're not keeping their vows of compassion or their vows of pure vision, So yeah, there's refuge, and then there's confession, and then there's remedial action, which would be to do the opposite of that thing. So if you're a recovering avoidant attachment person who was constantly dismissing other people's emotions, maybe do a counseling course, do some volunteer counseling. Maybe just spend some time with, have a cuppa with your lonely older neighbor. Maybe just learn to, if you're the kind of guy that would be like, as soon as feminism comes up, you're like, oh, man haters, just stay a bit longer before you have to leave the room and listen. It's not a personal attack against you, but you might learn something. You might learn why they're angry. What's the pain? What's the reason underneath the anger? Or if you're a white person who feels triggered when, people of color start speaking, or Indigenous people, just listen a little bit longer, or listen to a more moderate voice in that diaspora of voices, to see what you can change and what you can do better. Because guilt and shame and blame, not so useful. Condemnation, denial, not so useful. And then finally, so the remedial action in Vajrayana practice would be saying the Vajrasattva mantra, and maybe doing some, for example, if you killed an animal, saving the life of some animals, rescuing some animals, being vegetarian for a few months. There are just so many things, donating to a women's shelter. There are so many, doing an anger management course. There's so many things we can do to, And then finally, it's like in Buddhism we would say putting hay over the mud means sealing it, fixing it, which means vowing not to do it again, and trying to move on, basically, and trying to also look at what our triggers are for bad behavior, for addictive or unwholesome or harmful behavior, trying to avoid those triggers, those situations, and knowing your limits, and trying to learn to communicate more directly to get your needs met, all of those things, not going after the same people to be in that situation again. Going, if you're an addict and it's all a bad path once you get using a particular substance, find support to stay sober. If you're someone who gets really angry when there's conflict in the relationship, pulling back when you're angry and waiting until you're more calm so that you don't end up getting in a physical fight or being emotionally abusive. All of these things, learning our triggers before we get triggered. So, noticing what we do and putting it down, not doing that usual habit again, practicing to do something different, and committing to that path, to that more wholesome, healing, virtuous path. And there are stories, in Buddhism of Angulimala, who killed 999 people before he met the Buddha. And he just was like feeling very cynical about human beings, and they're all trash and they do terrible things. So why should I stop killing? People are crap. They're a plague on the planet. And the Buddha was like, Angulimala, you have suffered, and the ocean of suffering is vast, but look back and you'll see the shore. And Angulimala put down his sword and he's like, but who would let me live in peace now? And the Buddha said, if you became a monk, nobody would harm you. So at that time, Angulimala became a monk. He became a monk called Ahimsa, Venerable Non-Violent One. And the king who was with his army looking to hunt down Angulimala came a few weeks later and said, where is this? He said to the Buddha, have you seen this killer Angulimala? And the Buddha said, yes, here he is, Venerable Ahimsa. He's taken a vow to never kill again. And you could see how that could be problematic later on. Like any killer who wants to avoid the law becomes a monk. That's why we have a thing of, if you're in debt or if you are wanted by the police, you can't become a monk. Although I'm pretty sure there are some people hiding out in monasteries in Thailand. But anyway, this guy was genuine and he never killed again. And he had profound loving kindness. And there was once a woman who was in a lot of pain giving birth. Her like the baby's head was too big or something, and she'd been in agony for days, and he did a lot of loving kindness practice to her, and somehow it eased her birth. So pregnant women pray to Venerable Ahimsa. And he preached nonviolence for the rest of his life, and he got enlightened. But as a residual amount of karma, he was murdered. But he was murdered after, like, he'd already found enlightenment. So that's a good thing. Yeah. He was beaten sometimes also by the relatives of people he'd killed. So there were repercussions. And he came to the Buddha and he's like, these people are beating me up and I'm really trying to live a good life now. And the Buddha said, just be glad they're not killing you. Like, just take it with patience. Not to say that it's not bad to defend yourself, but yeah, that's a very specific case. So it's good to reflect, am I doing violence? Am I doing harm to myself and the world? And sometimes, to slow down and if there is a rupture, slow down before you jump in again. get some space alone, reflect so that you don't repeat the same thing. Yeah. Understand what's going on. What is the triggers?